And what do you believe will happen if we don't prepare for the changing world order then?
What we have left our generation with is debts, a broken down infrastructure, and fighting. So, I mean, the answer is,
for people that don't know what the changing world order is or why we should be prepared for it, is it really these main three things? We've talked about the first one. Is that what it is? Or is it something bigger that we should be worried about or concerned about?
these produce big things like financial crises or civil wars or external wars. So we should be concerned about those things.
Yeah.
So we talked about the financial. The second one that's happening in a way that never happened in my lifetime before is the way we are with each other in terms of internal conflict that has created a polarization, which is a win at all cost mentality.
Is this nothing that you saw when you were growing up?
Oh, no. It was not like this. And I measure in the book a lot of measurements. Okay. I could tell you that the amount, but you'll see in there, the amount of political polarity and the amount of compromise, the amount of political polarity is the greatest since 1900. The amount of compromise is the lowest it's been. It's measured by how people will voting across party lines.
Right.
There are two monoliths, and they're at war with each other. Okay, and we have populism, which is you have to get on one side or the other. Okay, and so when the causes that people are behind are more important to them than the system is in jeopardy. So you see this reflected right now in the politicalization and ideologies at a war.
Yeah.
And I'll give you lots of examples, or I'll give you a few. The risk of neither party accepting losing the elections is high, is significant. Right? How does that work if they don't accept losing the elections? Okay. The move toward power dynamics. Let's say a good example will be, there's a couple of Supreme Court rulings that are coming out related to abortion and gun rights. It would not be surprising to me if those Supreme Court rulings are not followed by some states.
Interesting.
Or another good example would be
so essentially saying we're passing a law, but then the state's saying we're not going to abide by the law.
Right. And you're seeing it's hardball. It's hardball. It's like Governor DeSantis of Florida and Disney. Ordinarily there is we do it by fighting each other and what kind of power, testing each other's power, almost to hurt each other, and that's and so the idea of democracy is compromise and reaching across that the law and the rule is of a higher purpose than anything else. But when you get other things that are more important to people that they're willing to fight for, then you get greater and greater, and it's self-reinforcing because moderates are people who want to work across party lines and so on and compromise are through history, through the French Revolution, Russian Revolution, Chinese Revolution, or these are civil wars. In all of those cases, the moderates are either they're hurt or they're disposed of, and you have to pick a side.
Really?
Well, but you're seeing this now. You're seeing right now that the political parties are united in one way or another. There's not much, and you better pick a side, and because that's what it's like. So that can have important consequences in terms of conflict. In other words, it's power. And that's happening not just internally, and it's certainly happening internally, but it's happening externally too. But internally, there's a dynamic that is going on in which the ideologies, rather than normal economics that we're used to, normal politics and normal economics, rather than that, the ideologies are dominant. So, for example, you think about that when Elon Musk buys Twitter, the decisions he will make regarding Twitter will probably have a greater effect on our society than the decisions the Supreme Court makes.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right?
What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on that? Him buying Twitter and doing what he's going to do with it.
That it's a reflection that it's one of the symptoms, like DeSantis and Disney, like tax president, like the Supreme Court, whatever. It's one of the symptoms that the ideology that I'm fighting for, the power that I have, that it's not normal economics in the usual way. You know, there used to be normal economics was it's all just, kind of almost you don't care about ideologies or something. You're just getting an ROI, and that the system will be better off if we allocate resources that way, and so on. Now it's that the system is better off if we ideologically choose the things we want and put the resources in that, and that there's a power game. So it's a different game that people should be aware of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you said one of your quotes is, "A nation's greatest war is within itself, over whether or not it can make the hard decisions needed to sustain success." Is there even a way we can unite behind a common purpose in the United States in your mind? Or is it the power dynamics and human psychology is so strong that people are going to be making these decisions and not want to unite over the next few years and decades?
I have a principle, which is that if you worry, you don't have to worry. And if you don't worry, you need to worry. Because if you worry about things like, if you worry because you get yourself into too much debt and you've got that, then you won't do that. Mm-hmm. If in our particular case, if you read about the consequences of what has happened in history about that, and you look at the likelihood and you say, okay, we can have this kind of a conflict, or we could have that kind of a conflict, external conflict, and boy, these conflicts are terrible. Maybe that sort of brings us more together, because we have the power together if we don't fight each other in that way, and we can compromise and so on. We have the power to produce incredible, great results because we have more resources than we ever did. There's more by any measure. Life expectancy is greater, GDP is greater, technologies are greater, and so on. So in a sense, our riches and our intelligence is greater than ever before. The biggest risk is how we are with ourselves. And so there are just basic things like, do you earn more than you spend? Right. Okay. If everybody strove for that, are you being productive and earn more than you spend? Are you good with other people? Okay. So you look at, so that and we're not fighting. We can compete in a healthy way, but we're not doing each other harm. We can have win-win relationships. Mm-hmm. We have a great power, but we're going to have to make a big adjustment because we're spending a lot more than we're earning. Okay, producing a lot of debt and money, it's devaluing. And we are at each other's throats. And I think that we don't do a good job of taking care of each other, even by comparison, and especially by comparison with a lot of other countries, because we don't create a bottom, a level that you don't let certain people fall below. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
My wife and I, particularly my wife, we live in Connecticut, and she works to try to help what are called disengaged and disconnected high school students. In other words, those in the poorest neighborhoods who the education is failing and they'll drop out of school. So in this state, which is one of the richest states in the country on average per capita income, 22% of the high school students are either disengaged or disconnected. Disengaged means
22%.
22% of the high school students are either have an absentee rate that's greater than 25% in failing classes, or have dropped out of school. 1 in 5, more than 1 in 5.
So what does that mean
they're
about
living in neighborhoods?
Wealthy neighborhoods, right?
Well, no. The thing about it is, I live in Greenwich, Connecticut, and up the road is Bridgeport, Connecticut, not far up the road, and that's a poor neighborhood. Okay. Because there's not much income in that neighborhood. So what in Greenwich, Connecticut, you spend $24,000 on average for a student in school, public schools. There they spend $14,000, and there are guns and there are shootings. And of course, if a kid grows up in that kind of an environment, where 1 in 5, where are they going to be? Where is their income? And their society is gangs, and their income is selling drugs or crime, and we've allowed that to happen. We've allowed that the bottom, and it's perpetuating. So what's happening is that's growing, and it's encroaching. You could see how crime is changing. Okay, and you could pick cities. It could be New York, it could be Connecticut, it could be Chicago. It can be San Francisco,
Los
and
Angeles.
So on.
Yep.
Los Angeles. Yep. It's encroaching. And so people are going to smaller and smaller enclaves, which might be terrific. Okay. But it's that's what's going on. And it's costly. In the state of Connecticut, it costs $600 million a year for incarcerations. Because where do those people go? Okay, it's crime, and then you're trying to do it. That kind of a thing has a terrible cost. When I think about what my generation has left the other generation, it's terrible. I was just in Singapore, and what they had savings, a lot of savings. And because they have a large savings, the income from that savings covers 20% of their budget.
Wow.
So one generation is giving the other generation a savings, a good education, and civility. And this happens in certain places. What we have left our generation with is debts, a broken down infrastructure, and fighting. So, the answer is, if we're all good with each other and we're productive and we earn more than we spend, we won't have a problem. But we got to get there.
How have you learned to bring together this great team that you've assembled, where people are going to disagree with you? It sounds like people are going to have different thoughts and be free to disagree with you on certain things. How do you know when the disagreement becomes toxic? When you can look at it from a point of view of like, okay, I need this disagreeing thought, but when does it become toxic where you actually need to let go of that person in your life or on your team?
Well, what's so interesting to me, I think, is that immediately your question about the disagreement is toxic. That's the first thing that people go to. Somehow they think disagreement is toxic. And supposedly it's because the part of our brain, which is the amygdala, which is this fight or flight, takes disagreement as the equivalent of a fight. And so it gets triggered that way. Now, instead, imagine it's a curiosity. In other words, I view it as a curiosity. I mean, I could tell if somebody's wanting to disagree with me, or I'm disagreeing with them because I want to hurt them. I mean, that's a different thing. If you want to hurt them, okay, then that's a different thing. But I mean, like, disagreement should be a comfortable thing that prompts curiosity and so on, and mutual respect. Like, how could I ever get along with you if I couldn't disagree with you? How many times, I mean, you're going to disagree. Like, you might one thing another. Then that's the beginning of trying to find out what's correct and the path. So a good partner is going to disagree with you, and you have to get past it. So the fact that you're asking that question the way it is, which is a normal question that everybody would ask, so reflects the fact that there's a hesitancy for disagreement, like it's a bad thing and it's a fight and it's nastiness, rather than just a disagreement that needs to be figured out.
And how have you personally learned how to disassociate the maybe personal attack against your ideas or your position on a stance of whatever, between someone personally attacking you and just, oh, this is a curious idea that they have, let me ask them more about it? How have you learned how to do that? And what advice would you have for others?
Well, first of all, I learned by it because it works. I mean, like, I'm afraid of the opposite. And how could I have, it helps my decision making. It helps our relationships. What are they going to do? Bottle it up, and I'm going to bottle it up? Is that smart? I mean, that sounds stupid to me. You don't even know what's true. You can't figure it out. So everybody's confused because nobody knows what each other's really thinking. And then also, like, you won't get to the right answer. And I mean, that just is too stupid a path for me to do it. And it's too risky a path, and it's so much more rewarding to do the other. Right?
Have you always been like that, or was it until you went?
Well, I think what helped me get that way was the markets. Okay. Because again, what happens is, there's just being right or wrong. There's just a winning or a losing. And okay. So just imagine, it's like being a trained monkey. What works, okay, should we push the button? Should we push the button? Okay. Yes. Okay. It makes sense. Okay.
Right.
Let's push the button is better than, I'm going to push the button, whatever it is. Okay. No, I don't see it that way. Okay. Let's figure it out. And so on. So and then the scorecard, I think, probably had the benefit of that kind of notion. I got a scorecard. Okay. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. Okay. Bring it on. Please stress test me. Oh, that's great. We're good partners. So that, to some extent, I think, played a role in, my types of experiences. Maybe if everybody had a scorecard on all their decisions, and then was being able to experience, essentially, you try it one way, you try it the other way, and you start to see what's better, and you get punished one way, you get rewarded the other way. Naturally, you want to go in the direction you get rewarded.
Right. So you stop thinking, okay, my way is the way. You start basing it based on data and scorecards, results.
Isn't that so stupid? My way is the way. I just want to make the best decision possible. I don't care where it comes from.
Yeah. But did you, at one point in your life, for a period of time, were you committed to your way and thinking that you had the answers?
Well, I like I say, I think before that 1982-ish incident, I probably was a lot more, okay, yeah, okay, I think it's right, and what I think is right, and I'm a smart guy, and so on. So I was like, that life is a good teacher, just a good, like 2x4 in the head, and you got a couple of those, and pain plus reflection equals progress.
Yeah. What is thoughtful disagreement in your mind, and how important is that in this moment, especially with this political unrest and economic unrest and just everything? How do people have thoughtful disagreement as opposed to kind of toxic disagreement?
Well, first of all, they got to want it. But let's assume they want it. Then there are three things you have to do, basically. First, you have to put your honest thoughts on the table and have the other person put their honest thoughts on the table. Okay, so now you know what you honestly think, both sides. That's great. Then there are protocols for disagreeing well. I wrote a bunch in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like I could go through some of those types of things. There are certain exercises that you could do. I have a 2-minute rule. You speak with 2 minutes without the other. You start to think, are you blocking? You have a mediator, maybe. In other words, somebody, when you're disagreeing, if you can't disagree, say, we mutually agree that this person will be our mediator, or maybe the judge, they'll decide. Maybe it's a group that decides. But in other words, you have a protocol for disagreeing and then deciding. So sometimes in that disagreement, hopefully you both learn a lot and you may reach an agreement, but you still may not have an agreement. But then you try to say, what's the best protocol for moving past that disagreement? Like you have a judge and a jury, and they have a case. And anyway, what do you have? Good protocols. So you have to have 3 things. You have to put your honest thoughts on the table. You have to go through processes that helps to reach the right answer, depending on how serious the question is, right? If it's, and then number 3, you have to have a way of getting past that decision and moving on. I have a basic view, though, whenever there's any disagreement or anything that's not going well, stop. Okay, pause. Don't just keep banging at each other.
When it's escalating, when people are yelling at each other.
Just pause and sort of go above it and say, what are our ground rules for disagreeing? How should we be with each other? And you turn your attention rather than to the argument at hand, but say, okay, if I think this and you think this, how do we do this? And then once you agree, okay, then you go back into the argument and then you follow those protocols, because half of the problem is that people just don't even know how to disagree.
Yeah.
But if you do it that way with those protocols and so on, and you get past your disagreement, it's great.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about
answer to your part 2 of your question.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's the greatest problem of mankind, I believe. Wow, that's a big statement. The greatest problem of mankind. And it is an exceptional problem at this moment in time, is people having opinions that they're stuck on, that they won't, like I have to have my opinion and that's right, and so on, because it prevents them from resolving it, from moving forward, to finding the best answer, from compromising or doing, so like everybody's arguing over everything, and they it's almost like they're killing each other. And we're in a society, I have another principle, which is when the causes that you're behind are more important to you and others than the system is in jeopardy. So are you just literally going to go fight? So here we are, as we think, will we fight, or will we have protocols for having thoughtful disagreements and getting past them?
That's why I love your principles and protocols. In your opinion, how has this last couple of years been in the history of investing for you? In the history of the last 40, 50 years, is this a really, really bad time in your lifetime? Or is this just another bad time, but not greater than previous bad times?
You mean in the world?
In the world.
Yeah. There are 3 things that are going on now, the 3 most important things that are going on to great extremes that have not existed since the 1930 to 45 period. Okay. And it's important to know those 3 things and then to understand them well.
Okay.
The first is what is going on with money and credit when you get to something like a 0 interest rate, and you need buying power. The government needs buying power, but they can't tax it, and they can't. So what we have is the production of a lot of debt that the central bank prints money and buys that debt to spend. And the last time that happened, in the last few years, it happened starting in 2008. Interest rates hit zero. They couldn't lower their interest rates. So they had to print a lot of debt, and the government went in and bought it. Okay. And we're coming to the end of a debt cycle. Okay. So this is a big thing, because where does the money come from and who will get what? The government will now determine that, and then they'll print it and it'll devalue money. Okay. And how money flows, a big deal. So that's number one. Mm-hmm. The second one are wealth and political gaps that are causing great conflicts. Throughout history, there's always been the main things that everybody's always fought over is money and power, particularly political power. So what we have is a situation when you have a large wealth gap and you have an economic downturn, particularly if you put a lot of debt having at the same time, you have a fight. I mean, that's been true through history. And it's reflected in the political gap. So the political gap is, it's classic political gap, left, right, capitalist, socialist. How do you distribute it? How are you going to deal with that? That becomes the other, and how you fight. So that's the second of the two. This wealth political gap that's causing the conflict, and it's coming at a time where we don't have much money because we don't have a good financial position. We're printing and putting it out. So
we're still paying off debts still, right?
Yeah, but with made up money. I mean, meaning what happened, like COVID was such a good example. Okay, you have COVID, and a lot of people and companies had falls in their income that would be ruinous. Mm-hmm. Okay, if checks didn't go out, we would have had a revolution.
Right.
And so those checks, and how do you save everything and so on? Okay, so and it's not like the government had real money, like they didn't have any money. They already owe a lot,
so they just printed more money to give.
So they made more debt, and then the government and the Federal Reserve printed it, and the checks went out, which diminishes the value of money and so on, and changes things. Yeah. So then the third thing is the rise of a great power to challenge an existing great power. So the rise of China to challenge the United States. In all history, there are world orders. What that means are they're the dominant power. It's like in nature almost, the big bull or something. Anyway, there's the dominant power. And then what happens is in 1945, we entered the American world order. The United States won the war, and it ended. And then in 1945, the winners of the world carved up the world. We had 80% of what was considered money at the time, gold. 80% of the world's money, essentially. We counted for half the world's economy. And the rules were set in the United States, basically. That's why the United Nations is in New York. The World Bank and the IMF are in Washington, D.C., because we began the American century. Okay, and then we are now at a time, we've never had another power challenge us in the same way. There was the Soviet Union, but they were always a fraction of the size economically, so couldn't compete on that same basis. They had nuclear weapons, but they didn't have the economic power and so on. But now we're dealing with China coming on as a power. I spent a lot of time in China over the last 36 years, by the way, and I admire how they're doing a lot of things. Right. I mean, I know it's controversial to say that, but in terms of they're a power.
Yeah.
Whoa! Since I started going there, their average income has increased by 30 times. So they're a comparable power, and they're also growing faster. And so that has an effect. So those three things are things that never happened in my lifetime before, but happened before in history, which led me to do the studies of what happened in history and the lessons I could gain.
What is that? Those three things, money and credit, wealth and political gaps, and the rise of China. What is someone like myself or some 30, 40, 45-year-old, 20-year-old, what should they do with that information? What should they be aware of? How should they apply it? Does it apply to people in America, general America, or is it only apply to the wealthy? What should we be thinking about?
No, it affects everybody. You know, it affects, like, we know, let's start with ourselves. Most importantly, forget about the outside thing. Can we be healthy and strong? And what do we need to do? Like, to know that you have to be in it together. Like, if we can row in the same direction, okay, if we can have thoughtful disagreement and get past that, if we can be in it together, like the wealthy and the poor, and you know, and if you figure it out, and I know it sounds so difficult, but at the same time, if you read history and you see what happens when it's not, when you have a civil war, like we could be on the brink of a civil war. That sounds so crazy, but the truth is, in most countries, in almost every century, there was a civil war or a revolution, some form of civil war or revolution. So it's almost inevitable that we're going to have something. Okay, you either resolve it or you start fighting so badly that you really do terrible things to each other.
Until you resolve it, yeah.
Well, the once you cross a certain line, there's no coming back. Okay, because you do the damage, you demonize, and that person's such an enemy, or that class of people is such an enemy that the communication's gone and the fight. Well, you see this in politics today. In other words, is there a respect for the system and a mutual respect of trying to resolve these types of things, or will they go to any lengths to win? Because a constitution or law will only carry you to so far, okay? There has to be an element of respect for it, right? If you think about the presidential election, it's quite something that we as a country, as a people, when somebody might win the popular vote, somebody else wins the electoral vote, there's not even an argument. Like in other countries, you might say, those who had the popular vote would say, what the hell, I've won the popular vote, I think it matters, and somebody says electoral vote and so on. Okay, there's not a question about that. Okay, now when you start to say, okay, is it this vote or that vote or this thing or that, and how far are you willing to go to fight, and does the rules matter? When you start to cross that line and you do harm, you hurt, and you alienate, then you go to accelerate this process. And people should know what that looks like, how terrible it is. So maybe if they know what it looks like and how terrible it is, and they can empathize a little bit. But I see people don't see it. I'm living in Greenwich, Connecticut. Connecticut has the highest per capita income in the country, and it's got the largest wealth gap. Most of the people in Connecticut are pretty poor.
Really?
I mean, some cases, very poor.
Huh.
Oh, I'll give you an example. This is the community my wife works to help. High school students. 22% of the high school students in Connecticut are either disengaged or disconnected. What that means is disengaged means they have an absentee rate which is greater than 25%, and they're failing classes.
They don't show up to class.
That's right. They show up, 3/4 of the time, and they're failing. Or that's disengaged. Disconnected is they don't know where they are. They've dropped out of school. 22%, 1 in 5. So school is not working for them, and they're in desperately poor areas. Like, okay, we had the coronavirus. And so her efforts and our efforts are philanthropic. That's what got her involved. They don't have computers. They don't have connectivity. They have problems getting food. They get food in school. They need the food in school because they don't have adequate food. Okay. And this is Connecticut, and it's right up the road. So we bought these kids, 60,000 kids, computers, and then we're trying to get connectivity and so on. And you start to see this. Okay. This is the same world. Now, I live in one neighborhood with my community, and then there's the other. They don't understand each other. They haven't lived there. They haven't empathized. And in fact, there are resentments on both sides, right? Like the people in my community, they don't feel that they're very rich by comparison to those other people, but also to take care of their families, to educate them. They have their own challenges, the work-life balance and so on. They have their financial insecurities and so on. So that's what they're focused on. And then they might think, oh, these other people, they're not taking care of themselves. Why don't they pull themselves up by the bootstraps? Do you know what it's like to be a kid growing up in that neighborhood and trying to, what are you talking about? You can't pull yourself up from, you know, there's a problem. There's not enough food. There are gangs. They even walking to school past neighborhoods that are gang shootings, and you can't, and there are not enough police to do it. Okay. So these two worlds exist. And then the others say, you know, well, here we are, and you're walking around with your fancy cars and your, you know, fancy clothes and so on. And we're suffering. I mean, come on. And so they don't understand each other and so on. We have to get past this. We have to be in it together, I think. Otherwise, we're going to kill each other.
What's the main thing that both sides need, whether that be in Greenwich, Connecticut, or in the USA on different sides? Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Is it awareness? What is that thing that both sides need in any rich, poor dichotomy?
Well, there's the intellectual thing they need and the emotional thing they need. Okay, intellectually, what they need is, or maybe emotionally, the fear and the understanding that where this will lead will be devastating, okay, if they don't deal with it. If they don't deal with it together, and you look at history, you need the fear. You can't give people necessarily empathy or love. You know, we could say, oh, they should care about the other person. Okay, that's too much to ask. I mean, yeah, you know, that's not realistic. Okay, but realistic is that if we all don't get it together, we're going to have, you know, you like all that stuff you got, well, you ain't going to have it anymore. And all of a sudden, the things that are the most basic in terms of take care of it. And then if you start to realize that it's productive, like what do you need to be successful? It's all I had when I grow up was I had parents who loved me and took care of me. I went to a public school, okay, and I came out to a world in which there was equal opportunity. Those are the only things you need, and you know, healthcare. But when you're young, you don't need much of that. So those are the only things you need. Now, even in these communities, sometimes you can't get the parents. But you can get people who care about them, their teachers and so on. But you have to strive for equal opportunity.
Do you think we have equal opportunity?
No, of course not. Let me look at any of the statistics. I mean, I can give you examples. I studied this issue because first when populism started to come around, and I thought I needed to study. Donald Trump is a populist. And then it's all around the world. And I needed to study the different quintiles, the top 20%, next 20%, so on. And I saw what the pictures of the lives of the majority of people are like, the bottom 60%. And equal opportunity, No, put that in perspective. Those in the top 40% spend on average on their kids' education 5 times as much money as those in the bottom 60%. It's a self-perpetuating thing. It's not a bad thing. Those parents care about having their kids well educated. So because they do and they take care of their kids, they're taking care of their kids, they're getting them well educated and so on. But not being well educated means you're not going to have equal opportunity. And so as that gets narrower and narrower, you have that phenomenon that so there are a lot of ways you can measure whether there's equal opportunity. But I don't even know we can agree that we should have equal opportunity. I mean, like I'd almost take a poll, of the American people and see, could we agree that we should have equal opportunity? Okay, that'd be an accomplishment. Okay, then if you could do that, then we say, can I take metrics, by which key performance indicators, by which I could say, how are we doing on the equal opportunity goal? Right. And then monitor that, and you say, it's getting better, or it's getting worse. If we could do that, we'd accomplish a lot.
Yeah, we got to get to that point first. This is fascinating.
What would you say if you could make the decisions on 3 things to change moving forward with the debt crisis, with the internal wars and conflicts from people, and the bottom that needs to rise up? What would you do if you could kind of snap your fingers?
I would say bipartisanship. If I was president of the United States, I would have a bipartisan cabinet to try to bring moderates from both sides, because moderates from both sides together. I'd have an economic program that was put together by like a Manhattan Project type of thing, in which they would people from both sides, not the extremes of both sides, but smart people from both sides would make changes. I have my own changes that could happen, but in which they would both increase the size of the pie and divide it well. And when I say divide it, I mean move much more toward equal opportunity in which people are productive. Like, for example, it's a hell of a return on investment if you provide good education, if you do that well. And I can give you many. If you provide good infrastructure, like it's really uneconomic to not have and everybody can not have connectivity anywhere. There's certain things you could. So I would want to have a program that increases the size of the pie and divides it well, particularly to productive people, and those who in some way or another can't be productive because they're handicapped in one way or another in that productivity, to provide them the assistance. So you have a civil society, but with still great opportunities to do great things and, acquire wealth and distribute wealth. I mean, that's it. You do need it to benefit most of the people. Okay. You need the system. So that's what I would do. Then what would happen is I'd have that middle, each deal with its extremes. So I think on each party, there's an extreme, there are extremists. And now what's happening is the moderates are dropping out of the political system. So because the moderates are dropping out of the political system, we're getting more and more ardent extremists who won't lose. They'll fight to the death with each other, and laws and that. So that scares me. Where if we were in it together and we did that in a bipartisan, smart way, that not everybody's going to love, but everybody does something. That would be the most important thing I would do.
Yeah. You're a wise man. And the third part of this, you talked about the changing world order, is how really all empires rise and fall at some point in what you call a big cycle. Can you explain more what this big cycle is and what part of the big cycle the USA is in and also China is in right now?
Okay. I'll describe the cycle. by an order, I mean like a world order or domestic order. I mean the system that's in place, run by the people who have the power, and then they determine what the system is like. And so you change orders, usually by wars, because you have a conflict. And then, okay, how do you resolve the conflict? They have a war. So World War II ended in 1945. The United States won World War II dominantly. It became the richest country in the world, having 80% of the world's money. Money was gold then. It had 80% of the world's gold. And a dominant military. It had a monopoly on that, and it accounted for half the world's economy. And so it set the rules. It's the reason why the United Nations is in New York and the IMF and the World Bank in Washington, D.C. It was the American world order because it was dominant power. Now, when you are in a dominant power, also these wars are sort of great equalizers. People come back from the war. It's not like some are rich and some are poor in the same way. There's a restructuring, and you don't have the same wealth gaps and resentments and so on. And then that usually means that you have a period of peace and prosperity. Peace because nobody wants to fight the dominant power. And then they work together and they produce peace and prosperity, and that happens. And that's really does best in the capitalist system, in which capital is provided to those who have good ideas, because they say, we'll invest in you and you'll be productive and so on. But what capitalism does at the same time is it has two challenges, two problems, is it creates wealth creates large wealth gaps. And it also creates higher levels of indebtedness. So it creates the large wealth gaps because it distributes that unequally. And then that can be self-perpetuating, because those who get power, like if you have more money, you can educate your children better than if you don't. The situation we're talking about in Connecticut, those parents are not going to be able to provide the education for the kids or the benefits that the others can. And so gradually you lose equal opportunity, and you produce wealth gap, and you produce resentments. And you also then create larger amounts of debt quite often. That means that's a problem down the road. Now, what happens when you become the world's largest power, this is also always the case. It happened with the Dutch, it happened with the British, that because you're so powerful and production, you go all around the world and you are the largest trading country in the world. You get more exports than other countries, and more transactions are in your currency. And so everybody uses your currency, which becomes the world's reserve currency because everybody's using it. And because it's the world's currency, those want to save in it. And so different countries save in it, which means that they lend to you in it. And that increases your debt to foreigners, because when they hold a bond or they hold cash in that, they're lending it to you to get the dollars back in the future. And so that is also one of the ingredients of making a top. There are the wealth gaps, there's that. And then there's also a change in generations and generation psychology. It's like the story of the three generations, from, whatever it is, from, rags to riches to rags again or something. The greatest generation, in a sense, are those who fought through the war, appreciate basic things, that kind of a thing. And then what happens is you become, when you're on top, you become more expensive and quite often more decadent. And what I mean by decadent, I mean that you might spend on things that are not good investments and don't last very long, or whatever, for entertainment at the sake of buying. So, for example, in the United States, I remember when we had a per capita income, which was 40 times China's, and we started borrowing from China. So anyway, these are the ingredients. And then you start to see that they cause problems, the financial problem, the internal conflict problem, and so on. then the type of fighting that we're talking about, where some moderates say, well, we need to reform things and make them better. Each is in their extremes. So you classically have the populists of the left and the populists of the right, who are individuals who will just fight for that side. And then you come down and you have that conflict, and you have that internationally as well. So when you have, let's say, a country like the United States, if you take the United States percentage of world GDP, or the United States' percentage of world trade, we used to be the largest exporting country in the world, but China's replaced that.
Yeah.
So, and the GDP thing. So now we have a rivalry, and you have different approaches to life. And then you say, oh, maybe you're going to have a conflict. And so everybody prepares for a conflict, which almost makes it self-fulfilling. So when you have this dynamic, which we're seeing, the world starts to split because countries want to align themselves with who's going to help them financially or militarily. Mm-hmm. The ideology, if you look at history, is not been as much an important determinant. Let's say the United States and Saudi Arabia have been allies for a long time, having nothing to do with whether the system's democratic or not. It has to do with whether their interests are aligned. And those are economic and military. And so we're seeing, when I go around from country to country, and people say, okay, the leaders say, should I be on China's side or should I be in the United States' side, whichever? They say, well, if it's economic, China's more important to me. If it's military, the question is, will the United States be there when we need them to operate that way? And it's those kinds of calculations that produces the cycle that traditionally, unless you rectify it, like we all come back together again somehow and we're all good with each other, right, ends up causing the fight to find out who is more powerful. And then it's the war or whatever. And then there's a winner and a loser, and a new world order begins. And that's what the cycle looks like.
So is there a world where we will never have war? Or is it always going to be some type of war happening so that power dynamics shift and this just continues?
It's so interesting because in the mid-1600s, this is interesting. In the mid-1600s, there was 30 years of war. They call it the 30 Years' War in Europe. And they just kept, beating the daylights out of each other. And that is when they invented countries as we know it. Before then, there were no boundaries.
It was winner takes all. It was just kind of, this is my space.
It was just, it was like there were no boundaries. And what mattered was power. And if you wanted something that the other guy had, you'd go get it, and he'd do the same with you. And there was this constant fighting about things. And then in the 1600s, they were fighting about religion too. There's the religious Reformation and the others, which also had to do with power because the church was powerful. But anyway, so they invented countries as we know it with boundaries, and you determine what goes on in your borders and so on. And of course, we've and that reduced for the next 100 years. There were hardly any wars.
Interesting.
But they and when the time comes, there's no universal legal system. Mm-hmm. There's no universal policeman. So if you don't have a universal legal system, there have been attempts of that with the United Nations or before that, the League of Nations. They attempted that, but power rules. And so you're going to have tests of power. It'll all come down to tests of power.
Right. You've come up with a template for assessing the health of a country and what leads them to success or failure. What are the main metrics that you've come up with to assess? And where's the USA at right now in that assessment?
I have, I want everything that I do to not be opinionated. I want everything that I do to take measurements of health. So, and there were 18 different measurements of health that you can see in the book. So you could look at it as a health indicator. And then you could see with those, like a health indicator, what does that create the next 10 years prognosis for that? Because if you're healthy, then you'll have a better prognosis if you're not healthy. And so there are 18 of them. I won't take you through them, but anybody who cares to go through them, you can see them. But there are basic things like, first, are you financially healthy? Do you, what's your income statement and balance sheet look like? Do you spend more than you earn, or do you earn more than you spend? Are you saving? What's your income statement and balance sheet look like? A very big leading indicator is the relative level of education. And those that have a more educated population, and you could see the numbers rise, you could see education levels in one country or another rise or decline in these charts. So you could see, how is the United States in its education, and how are other countries, and is that gap, is it improving or worsening? Because education levels are very indicative of well-being and economic behavior. Related to education is civility. Civility is not, so you learn education like facts and how to do calculations and things. That's one type of education. But you also learn how to behave with each other, the civility, the idea of respect and so on. So you have a civilized society of behaving well. That's part of it. And that usually happens in the home as well as in the school system. School can't do everything. And and you could see these numbers, and they're a problem, okay, in terms of these kinds of numbers, civility, and we have challenges, as there's some often single families that are having financial problems and don't have, those circumstances, and then you have an opiate problem. You have other things that stand in the way. Okay, rule of law. Countries that have rule of law and respect for the law that keeps order and effectively. Loss of, when crime rates go up, it's a problem. A very good indicator is corruption levels. There's a corruption index that all countries have, that you can get for every country. You can see how it changes. And as it goes up, there's a negative 52% correlation with the growth of a country and its corruption over the next 10 years. Okay, so
where's the USA at right now?
The USA is reasonably good.
Compared to the rest of the world.
Reasonably good on the corruption element. Reasonably good.
Where is Mexico, I guess?
Bad. Russia is bad. It's interesting because these are predictors of the future.
Interesting.
And what you find out is, like, if you look at Russia, I'll give that as an example. It's blessed with the greatest natural resources of any country in the world. The value of its natural resources are 40% higher than the next highest country, which is the United States. And it does a pretty good job of having an educated population. But its cultural issues, it's not heavily indebted and so on, but its cultural issues in terms of these things like corruption. Also, there are measures of lots of measures of bureaucracy versus efficiency. Lots of measures of attitude. Can I start a business and make my dreams happen? You can see the differences between countries on just that attitude. Okay. And also you could see it in the bureaucracy. How long does it take to set up a business? There are statistics like that. So you'll see a bunch of them in the book.
Gotcha. Sure. Well, I know when a big part of your mission is bridging the educational gap around economics for people, and really people understanding about money, how to use money effectively, and just understanding in general. If you could, again, I'm sharing kind of hypothetical scenarios, but if you could change some things around about how we learned growing up about money, 2 to 3 key things, whether it be in the school system or what you wish parents knew that they would all teach children from the ages of 5 to 15, what would be those 3 things that you wish children just knew more about around money?
Well, I think you said it. If there was education and experience from the age of 5 to 15, that would change everything. We learn differently. Scientists have shown prior to puberty, we learn in an internal way. And you'll find that a number of people had their passion at around age 12, because that has to do with how the brain changes. But if you take that 5 to 15 and you incorporated it in the education system and the practice of saving, spending, and so on, you don't need a PhD in this thing. The money thing is kind of very basic. If I can buy it for less than I sell it,
right.
That's a good thing. Mm-hmm. The more volume I could do, the better it is. Then there are fixed costs and there are variable costs. So if I'm going to build a lemonade stand, okay, what's that going to cost me? Okay, that's a capital expenditure. Okay,
sure.
But it's all the same stuff that you could learn, at those ages, and you don't. And
is there a good game? I mean, I feel like your next thing should be a game that kids can learn to play. I don't know if that's the new Monopoly or what that is.
I have a son, which is in his passion is ed tech, educational technology, and he wants me to do that with him. And maybe I hope one day.
Please, Ray, please. we need a game to make it simple,
Yeah, Louis, it ain't like I'm not busy,
I got you. I understand. What will so where is, to go back to the U.S. and China, the big cycle? Where is China at in the big cycle?
Well, China's in this stage where I've spent a lot of. Let me phrase it this way. I spent a lot of time in China starting in 1984, not to earn money because they didn't have any money, but because I was very curious. And then I got to know and like the people, and I was able to help them develop their stock markets and things and so on. And that was, and I like meaningful work and meaningful relationships. That's my thing. And so I watched since 1984, when I first started. Per capita income has increased by 26 times. The poverty rate, measured by hunger, went from 88% to less than 1%, and life expectancy increased an average of 10 years.
Wow. So the poverty used to be at 80%?
Sorry?
84? You said it was 80% back in 84?
Hunger was 88%.
Hunger. Wow.
Hunger. That type of poverty, not being assured to have a square meal. And I watched how they do that. I think that there's, and so what has happened is that they have become a roughly comparable power of the United States, in some ways a bit ahead, in some ways a bit behind, and so on. And that's in most things. Okay. If that list of 18, if I was going to go down that list,
yes,
and I would say, okay, do they have better educated people than we do? Well, it depends on what it almost goes. It depends. Are we talking about public education? We talking on average? Did they have more? Whatever. If you talk about military, it depends. Is it in that region? Is it of that type, or is it another type or something? But it's comparable. If you talk about technology, okay. When I first went to China, I would give $10 calculators to people, and they thought they were miracle devices.
Wow.
Now, if you take it in artificial intelligence and most technologies, there depends on the one. There may be ahead in some and not. So what that means is that they've come up to be a leading competitive power. There's no other competitive power like that. Now, a lot of countries now, which is scary, are roughly comparable in military, meaning if you have a war, if we have a war with Russia, it's not like the United States is militarily dominant or so. And there, more countries have become that way. We spend more, and we have bases in 70 countries, but at the same time, that means we're overextended or extended. And it doesn't mean that you'd win a war. If there was a war in Europe, everybody'd be a loser. So, and there are different types of wars, cyber wars, as well as military wars and the like. Okay. So, what we're now having is a situation where there is that rivalry that could be good, healthy confrontation. However, history has shown when you deal with who's going to set the rules of the game, there might be disagreements. And if there are disagreements, how are they resolved? Like the trade dispute. It's not like we both sides took it to the World Trade Organization and say, we're going to plead our cases, and then you make a decision. They didn't even think about that, right? They go to, I'm going to do this if you do this. And that's where we are, sort of. So the world is breaking up into these parts where there are two sides, kind of like if you look at World War II, by way of example, there are the Allied powers and the Axis powers, and then they're in Europe and in Asia. And there are different alliances in Europe than there are in Asia, because each has their own interests. And it's developing that way. So when you take the Ukraine and you look at the Ukraine and that's more aligned with the other side, let's call it the Axis powers, which are the challengers to the United States and to some extent the NATO powers. And you have that conflict. And you could see in a number of statistics or actions how the sides are lining up. Like, for example, when they just ask, are you going to apply the sanctions or not? Are you going to do this and that? In the United Nations, did you vote against Russia or not? And so on. And you could see all those things, and you could see how the sides line up. For example, India lined up with Russia. And so you could see how this is lining up. And you could see that we're coming into this. There's no conversations and communications that's even polite between the two countries right now. And those things, and that's where we are. And if you look at history, that's a dangerous place to be.
I'm curious about the mindset of making money, and there's a massive wealth gap. There are people who are making money, and some that seem to be making more and more money, and others that are always seem to be stuck in the ability to make money, to save money, to invest money. They always seem kind of trapped in not making it. What would you say is the mindset that wealthy people have around making it and growing their money for them versus the mindset of people that stay stuck in not making it?
Well, I want to distinguish. There's big differences in opportunities.
Yes.
So let's say, supposing you have two people of comparable opportunities.
Yes.
And then they were going to do that.
Yep.
Okay. The marshmallow test, as you know, apparently, is you take a kid and you say, okay, you can have one marshmallow now, or you could have 2 marshmallows in 15 minutes. Or
if you don't eat the first one. Yeah.
If you don't eat the first one, right?
Yep.
Okay. Once you start to realize that deferred gratification is going to make you better and so on, and you start to count and you say like something like, how many days, weeks, months, or years can I live if I don't have money come in? And you start to focus in on that. That's the first step. Okay. Like the marshmallow test.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I want to save. You got to start there. Then if you do that, you're necessarily going to go save in what? Mm. And then you'll start to get exposure to how these things are different. Okay. Then you start to care. Mm-hmm. I can have one of these and one of those, and you start to experience, and then you start to learn. And basically that's what makes the difference.
Mm-hmm. That's it. So first, having the ability to have delayed gratification, then obviously diving in, researching, testing, and trying different things. But the more and more you can say you don't want something now for greater later is the essential key.
Well, and what it does then, when it comes to the money, that means money.
Yeah.
Now, at that moment that you don't want it, you have savings. That means I want savings.
Right.
Okay. Now you got savings. So the next thing inevitably that's going to come at you is, where do I put it? Mm-hmm. And then you get your choices, and then you experience it and you learn, right?
Yeah, because there's lots of places to put it for investments. There's real estate, there's stocks, there's building your own company. There's different places to invest. What have you found are the top places that people should be investing?
Well, I think first you start with, what are the most important things that you're closest to? Like, is it your business? First, calculate how many days, weeks, months, or years you can live on your saving. Mm-hmm. Because when you do that, you'll gain security. You'll gain that. Okay. So look at how much you're spending. Okay. And then say, how much do I need? And whatever that number is, you're going to need more than that, because it may go down rather than go up. So, okay, now do I have a year's spending? Mm. Okay. So I think you start there. Then you start to think, what are the things that are most important for me? And then you start with your business or your residence that have a symbiotic relationship and that you know well. Let's say if you start with your business, okay, you're closer to that, investing in yourself with whatever that may end up being. That may be your best investment.
Not okay. Real estate, not stocks, not the market.
Well, it depends. If you're not, if you're doing something where you can do it yourself, and that's the thing. But if you're in a job and that's not the thing,
right?
Because you're in a different position. Okay. But anyway, and then I really think there's something good about your home, a basic thing about your home, because it's nice forced savings. And it also means that you fix it up. You're saving, you find out there's, oh, well, if I add this thing or that thing, and you're enjoying it. Mm-hmm. So when you're enjoying it and you're controlling it and it's yours and so on, that's pretty good. And if they keep mortgage tax deductions and so on, there might be some benefits to it also. Okay. But that's not a black and white answer. So you could take a sharp pencil and say, is it better to rent or buy? Okay. That's a different question. Maybe yes. But by and large, am I going to move? All of those other questions. But so when you start with, okay, what is it that's close to home and how much? You need a certain amount that's liquid. In other words, you got it in your house, you got to make a mortgage payment or something, and all of a sudden you're, it's not liquid, and you lose your job. Well, that can cause you trouble. So how much do I have that's liquid? How much do I have that's not liquid? Okay. And you start to get those things right. Okay. I've got enough liquid. I got enough, okay, not liquid in those other things. Okay. Pretty soon you're getting yourself in good shape.
Yeah.
You do those things, you're pretty much in good shape. And then you're also having some experiences, and then you go beyond that, and then so you start to, okay, what's a stock? What's a bond? And then, you learn through experiences. I learned through my experiences. I started when I was a kid, 12. I used to caddy, and I took my caddying money and I put it in the stock market. And I was lucky. What happened to me, by the way, is I took my caddying money and I bought the only company that I ever heard of that was selling for less than $5 a share. And I thought that I was really dumb. I thought I'll buy more shares, so if it goes up, I'll make more money. And it was the only company. It was a company that was about to go broke, but some other company acquired it, and it tripled. And I thought, this is an easy game. And I like it, easy money. So, but you experiment and you learn.
Can we start with kind of this first principle that you've been talking about and what we should be aware of that's coming?
Sure. To put that in context, before we get into the cash part, I'm a global macro investor, and economics, markets, and politics and geopolitics all matter. And there were three things that are happening. You pointed them out. Three things that are happening in our lifetimes that never happened in my lifetime or our lifetimes, and that I learned before I have to study past periods. And those three things, as you point out, are the creation of a lot of debt and money. The second is the amount of internal conflict that we're having over money and values and what that's like. And the third is the changing world order with countries like China and Russia competing with the United States in a way that didn't exist before. So back to the point that you're making about that money, it's a basic thing. Everybody agrees we need more money and we need more spending. But if you spend more than you earn, you have to borrow. And that creates debt. But that at first it's credit, so it gives you buying power.
Right.
But you have to pay it back, and that becomes depressing. And so in order to avoid that, central banks can print money and buy it back, right? But when they do that, that depreciates the value of money. So what we had was a lot of money and credit go out to a lot of people, a lot of buying power. Everybody, when they got it, they thought, that's great. And somehow they seem surprised that when they spend it, the prices of everything go up. Okay. But the truth is that if you divide the amount of money and credit that's used for spending by the quantity of goods produced, you can calculate, the prices will change. And so that's what's going on. And that's what went on in a giant wave, the Federal Reserve and the government together, a giant wave. And that produced a giant amount of inflation, Is
it 8.5% right now? Is that what it is?
Yeah, well, it depends. I mean, it depends which number you're using. It's between 7.5% if you use year over year, or if you take the core inflation rate, it's closer to 12. And it's it's rising. There's some temporary influence, but it's basically because of the amount of spending. You can measure the amount of spending, not because of the bottlenecks.
And for people that maybe are hearing this inflation and have been hearing this recently, before we finish the first point, for a lot of people, when I grew up, I never understood what inflation even meant. They didn't teach this to me in school. They weren't teaching this to me in high school, college. It really wasn't a thing that I learned. I just heard it and knew that people were worried about the cost of things increasing. Can you explain what that actually means to us? For someone who's making $70,000 a year in the Midwest, what does that mean to them?
Buying power is what matters, right? And so what happens is when inflation goes up faster than your other sources of income, you lose buying power.
Okay.
But what happens is somehow that seems more acceptable sometimes to people than if it was just taken out of your pocket. You see, if they, let's say, raise taxes or take it out of somebody's pocket, everybody complains, whoever's had the pocket taken out of. But if it comes through printing of money and everybody gets checks, it's more acceptable. But what happens is those who are holding money, like money market funds and bond funds, lose the buying power of that. So think about those bond funds. Those bond funds are like down about 10%, and inflation is up over, let's call it 8%. So they lost 18% of the buying power. Wow. So it relieves debt. We think of it as meaning higher prices, but to some extent, that's a rich man's perspective, because they say, oh, now I have to pay more. But the reality is you don't get more stuff from that higher inflation. And so it bids it out of the hands of some people. And that hurts the people who are, who don't get it, because it's really so that's what's going on. You lose buying power. And so we're seeing a time now where you're going to lose buying power to inflation. And now you're going to see the Federal Reserve also tighten money and credit and raise interest rates. And when they do that, that creates less buying power, because when they say, okay, now you can't spend as much money and the prices are going high, but they do that in their crude way of trying to reduce inflation. But you get it from both ends, the higher prices and then the higher interest rates you have to pay, and also and the higher debt service costs, and also less availability of money. So it's a squeeze, like the squeeze that happened in the 1970s.
So does that mean, if someone is hearing this and they're thinking, okay, inflation's going up, the buying power is going down, this is a squeeze, is this going to happen for 5 years, 10 years? Is it eventually going to level out? What should we be expecting, do you think?
These things go in paradigm shifts that quite often take a relatively long time, because everybody's mindset is in a paradigm shift. Everybody's mindset is in a certain place and they're doing certain things. For example, investors think that cash is safe and they don't pay much attention to inflation. And then what happens is they get inflation and they realize that if I'm holding cash, I'm losing buying power. So then they shift, they sell out their cash or they sell out their bonds and they put that into other things. And when they do that, that also contributes to inflation. Changes like that also happen in a lot of ways, like cost of living increases in compensation. Where in the past, when they don't worry about inflation, then they don't think about, do I have an inflation-linked contract for my work? Right. Or do I have enough inflation assets? It might be, do I need to buy, I'm going to store my money in a house, or I might store my things. And so that pendulum swing from one mindset and one positioning to another mindset and another positioning in the early stages tends to be self-reinforcing. Those actions produce more inflation and more inflation psychology until that goes to the opposite extreme. Like in the 1970s, that people were surprised about what happened because they weren't used to inflation much. Then you had the inflation, and in the beginning, it swung. And then at the end of it, they said inflation will never end, and everybody's positioned for it never ending. And then, of course, what happens is it's so bad that then the central bank goes the opposite extreme, and then they get surprised. And so the 80s was a period which was the exact opposite of the 70s, where you have falling inflation, high real interest rates, and so on. And so the worst assets to own in the 70s were bonds, and the best assets to own in the 80s were bonds. So you see these pendulum swings that way.
So what would you say are the best assets to own in this decade?
Well, the best assets to not own, that's the most important thing, I think, is cash. And quoted, cash is trash. There will be a tightening here for the time being, and that tightening will have an effect. It'll hurt asset prices and so on. But cash is not the asset to own, and bonds are not good to own, in my opinion, because it's debt. It's owning somebody's debt, and you won't get a return. Think of it: the interest rate will not reach the inflation rate. So that's the problem. So you'll have that one. Then what you have to have, I think, most importantly, is a well-diversified portfolio of other assets. Diversification is a very powerful tool because it can reduce risks without reducing expected returns. Now, there's lots of ways of getting what you think good investments are. They might be things you know about and the local businesses and so on, or they might be stocks, or they could be maybe a little gold, or maybe a little bit foreign investing. Diversification is very important to do that in a balanced way. So I would generally say that would be what I would recommend.
I'm curious, what's the greatest gift a rich person or someone with money can give someone who doesn't have money?
To give the knowledge, teach a man how to fish is better than to give him a fish. I mean, I think you can give them both. You can give education, and you can, but ability, the capacity to be productive, because, if I can give you the capacity to go out in the world, it's like go into a jungle. I give you a knife, and can you live in the jungle? Okay. If I give you that capacity, that's the best thing I can give you. That's why I wrote the book and, pass it along. I wrote those principles over years, and I wrote them down, and that's what I want to pass along. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
But if you've got money, you can help people a lot in a lot of different ways, which is thrilling.
What would you say then are the three greatest skills that people that aren't financially abundant or that are struggling financially should learn to master in order to be in a better position financially? 3 skills, what would you say they should learn?
Well, as I said before, I remember watching the movie, I was young, David Copperfield with W.C. Fields, and he speaks to David Copperfield, and he said something like, and I'll put it in dollar terms: you earn $100 and you spend $105, that's misery. If you earn $100 and you spend $95, you'll have a good life. I mean, it wasn't exactly like that, but it was, but basically, I know so many people who don't earn much, but are there. Because if you start to think about what it is that it costs you to live in terms of, let's say, the basics, give me a bed to sleep in, give me the food, let me be educated, and so on and so forth. I think most people can get themselves in a position where, they're net positive. Mm-hmm. So if you can be net positive and you could do that, that's number one, as I carry that. So that's number one. Then I guess it was the list that we went to, the second is, what do you do next in terms of what do you need? What do you invest in? And then, going beyond it. And then avoid the following mistake, the most common mistake of investing, thinking that the investment that did good is a good investment. People rather more expensive. The things that quite often, those markets that did really, really well became more expensive, and everybody, smart money is all the time comparing them and competing. So what happens is the naive money buys the thing that was hot or is hot. The thing that has been terrible, which might be the thing that's beaten down. So I would say also an important element. Okay, so here's another one that's really important. Diversify.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right, because what I learned about this is that, first of all investments compete. And it's not easy to tell whether one investment is better than the other, because if people could do that, life would be easy and everybody would make a ton of money. And this is a competitive game that's very difficult to compete in. So it's very difficult to say which one's better or worse. You could take experts and you could and do all sorts of tests, and you'll find out that they can pick that, and you can't tell whether the worst ones are going to be better. So because of that, you understand that even picking the best ones is difficult, and particularly if you're naive. Like, we spend hundreds of millions of dollars each year on research to try to give us an edge. Wow. Okay. Now you've got to compete with us. So competing in the markets is more difficult than competing in the Olympics. Wow. You wouldn't think I'm going to compete in the Olympics, but there are more people who try harder in order to do that. So it's a zero-sum game. So, but diversification, that they're different, will reduce your risk without reducing your return.
Yeah.
So if you know how to diversify well, so that's critical. So I would say, again, get your savings right. And the reasons I say, I would say, have great humility about what you don't know. Don't buy the thing that was hot. Don't just because you think it's hot. And then know how to diversify well. Those would be the most important things I could convey.
I love that you talk about the sports analogy, the Olympics. You're speaking my language now as a former football player. Some of the greatest quarterbacks seem to get not too high. They get excited, but not too excited, and not too low when things go good or bad. How important is that skill to be emotionally resilient on both levels, high and low, for you? How important is that skill?
It is one of the most important things possible, and it's not easy to do. So I needed to, do two things. I found that by writing down my principles and the rules, and then testing how they would have performed over time, and that's where the algorithms came. So that I can basically, just like a machine, play it click, 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 okay, with execute the game plan. Don't do it because I know what the experience is like. The experience is like you're wrestling around with it. You're losing money. Like the day you put on a trade, it doesn't go either straight up or straight down. It goes against you. So now, I don't know, you're losing money. Okay, how much should you lose? What's your game plan? You've got to know your game plan and stick to the game plan. And you can't be shaken out. And yet the emotions are going to cause you to doubt yourself. And plus, it brings you stress, all of that. So you have to execute a game plan that's very well thought out, right?
Yeah.
Then over time, you start to develop some better instincts. Like if you're excited and you're going along, be scared. If you're doing something you're really worried about and nobody else is doing it, maybe good. Don't be dissuaded. See, the markets are very different than consensus decision making. It's counter consensus because the consensus is built into the price. Right. So if everybody loves something, it's expensive. And if everybody hates something, it's cheap. So where most people say, this is like, oh, what a great company. Okay, Amazon is a great company. We got Amazon's a great company. Who doesn't got that Amazon's a great company? Okay. And then, okay, I'm going to go own Amazon. Okay. But if everybody's got that, it's a great company and it becomes increment less great than they anticipated, bam, that baby goes down. So you have to start to develop some of those instincts or a game plan.
And what financial advice would you give to millennials who don't have these tools yet, besides obviously getting your book and starting to practice some of these things? But I feel like millennials are overspending more than ever. They're uneducated on finances and personal finances. What advice would you have there?
Pay attention to the feedback you get from the realities you encounter.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, pain plus reflection, you will get the pain. Pay attention to it, listen to it, because you're going to get the pain.
Is now the time to start investing, or is it more just save up some reserves for 6 months to have some cash to live your life before you start investing? Or is it important to build the discipline and the habit of investing $50 a month, $100 a month in a diversified portfolio, no matter how much you're making?
I remember going through this because I didn't have any money. And
when was this, right?
This was 1982, 83. I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad to help to take care of my family bills. So I remember thinking, how many weeks could I live if I lost my income? And I started counting in weeks, and I would try to go out because if I got hit, so I think that's the way to do it. You start to count how many weeks. Can it be a month? Can a year? Can I get up to a year? I didn't like that because of the fact that there's an obligation, and it's like, if I get, then I'm going to be drowning. I'm trying to keep my head against water. This is just my own bias. But anyway, count how many you can, and then assume that its buying power over the next number of years can fall by 3 or 4% a year, or if you put it in a risky investment, like stocks or something, it can fall by more. So cut that number maybe in half and have twice as much, because you have to understand that that's your freedom. That is your safety. So that first band, you must take care of that first band. Take care of that. Once you get past that and you feel, okay, I could take care of my family and I could take care of in a worst case scenario, then you have the freedom to then take other kinds of risks. But when you're building that portfolio, it's the same thing as when you have a lot of portfolio past that, just you want to diversify well. Because you could see what happens to the markets. Every market, stock market, bond market, most markets have had times where they've gone down over an extended period, 60 or 70%. So in buying power. So I think diversify, count that, and build it, and realize that's your saving. One thing I do for my kids and grandkids, and always did, or as long as I could start to afford it, was for every holiday, like Christmas or their birthday, I would give them a gold coin. And I said, I never want you to sell that gold coin until there's an emergency, a real emergency, never because you want to buy things. And the reason I did that, and they'll build over a period of time, that'll build something. And I said, don't even sell it. You pass it to your kids unless there's an emergency. Okay. And so you're building that savings, because I think we so easily spend so much money on junk. So anything that I would give them, whatever it would be, I don't know, a piece of clothing, a thingamajig, a toy or something,
right,
will probably be gone in a year.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the power of saving and that resource, the relief it gives you and the power it gives you is so great. So yes, save it, diversify it.
I'm gonna continue to stay on this topic, but also go off a little bit because you mentioned how, I guess it was 40 years ago, you lost your money and you had to borrow $4,000 from your father to just kind of survive and pay your bills. How much money had you built before then, before losing it?
I don't remember. It wasn't like it was a ton.
Gotcha.
I was fairly early in my career.
Uh-huh.
I had a small investment business. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it wasn't a ton.
I'm curious how you, from having some money to losing it, how you then went on a 4-decade run of getting to where you're at now. Was there something in your mindset that allowed you to believe in yourself still?
Yeah. Okay.
That didn't say, "Oh, I've lost it all." I don't believe in myself anymore because I just ruined my finances.
That extremely painful experience was probably the best experience of my life.
Really?
And it changed my way of thinking, ways I'll describe. But let me say, before that, I didn't have much money. My dad was a jazz musician. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And I felt, of course, rich. I had two parents who loved me. I went to public school, and then when I was a kid, I did odd jobs and I caddied. And so when I put in the stock market when I was 12 and I got hooked on the game. So I never had much money, but then I built up some and then had that experience. And so that experience, which was also a very public experience, was very painful, but it changed my approach to decision making in really a profound way. First, it gave me the humility and fear of being wrong that balanced my audacity to double check myself and, in fact, try to find the smartest people I could who disagreed with me to have them stress test my thinking. So I'm never sure if I'm right. Like my track record of being right is probably 70 or 75%-ish, somewhere in that 70%, let's say, something like that. And I'm used to being wrong sometimes, and it's painful. So the stress testing of my opinions gave me an open-mindedness to learn a lot, and also diversification. I learned how to diversify without reducing my risks. If I could take a lot of uncorrelated bets, the return will equal the average of those bets, but the risk can be up to 80% less. And it changed it really caused me to reflect, because I remember thinking to myself, it felt like I was sitting next to a jungle and I could sit on the safe side. There's always risk in return. And what would I do? Would I have a less great upside and be safe? Or would I go through crossing this jungle at which things could kill me or whatever in an attempt to have a great upside, a great life, a great upside? And so that puzzle led me to do the things I described, but also I knew that I had to go have the great upside and not be constrained by the risk. And so I did the two things that I've described, but going into the puzzle, I found that it was great that to find people who could see things that I couldn't see, and vice versa, so that we were on the mission together, because people see things differently. I learned how people see things differently. Somebody will spot this or that, and then that back and forth helps you make better decisions. And if you're on the same mission with them. So one of the things I wanted was this meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And I found that that was so good that when I, sort of got to the other side, like, I had enough money and upside or whatever, I still wanted to stay in the jungle and I still wanted to do this because the act of doing that with people that I was doing this meaningful work and meaningful relationships with was rewarding in and of itself, as well as success. So one of the things that you can learn is that you can see through other people's eyes. That doesn't mean you accept what they say blindly. It's that you think about their reasoning. And if you do that, that's good. It also gave me a principle, which is like one of my fundamental principles, which is pain plus reflection equals progress. Mm-hmm. Okay. We have this pain, whatever it is. And okay, the reaction is a negative reaction and can almost be, why did that thing happen to me? And so on. If instead, when one calms down from the pain, is a lesson there about how reality works. Okay, it happened. Reality works that way. And then there's a thought, how do I deal with it better to produce better? What's my lesson? And if you acquire that, I would acquire that. I still acquire that. And then I wrote them down as principles in my books. That's why the collection of principles, it's like a journal. I wrote pain plus reflection equals that. And then you write down the principle and that's what the collection of principles came from. That event, that painful event was the basis of going from, where I was, which was broke, to, where things, where I am and where I'm transpiring, which is trying to pass along my wealth and my advice to others now.
The greatest relationship in your life, who has that been for you? The person in your life who's made the biggest impact?
Well, my wife. Yeah. She's been a partner for 43 years, so at all dimensions, I love her intellectually, spiritually, physically, in all dimensions. And we share the most important things, everything from the children and the grandchildren to excitements of life. So without a doubt, it would be her.
Yeah. And you write the book in her honor, which I saw in the beginning. I'm curious, what's the greatest lesson she's taught you about becoming a better man and a better business leader?
Well, I get to see the world through her eyes, and through her heart. So she shows me so many things. I would say it, through all the years, it's been many, many, many different things. Right now, she's in the process of, over the last 10 years, of helping the poorest, most disadvantaged kids in bad neighborhoods in high school to try to get them through high school and so on. And so she's given me a window into a different world that has been helpful. But it's, it's everything. It's spirituality. It's, different places in the world. It's so many things.
That's beautiful. You've seen a lot of pain in your lifetime. Maybe personally you've experienced some, but just in the world, from the different pains that have happened in the world, whether it be the economy or injustice, different things that happen, death. You've seen a lot of loss just in general in life. And you talk about how pain plus reflection equals progress. I'm curious, it seems like there always needs to be some type of breakdown in order for people to be able to look back and ask themselves, okay, what's working, what's not working, what do I really want, and how do I get there? Do you think it's possible to have progress without some type of pain in our individual lives?
Well, pain is a heck of a teacher by comparison. Yeah. I mean, like when you get pleasure, then you just keep doing what you're doing, but it doesn't teach you to change. Pain, when you put your hand on a hot stove or do anything that got you into a position, teaches you maybe about how to approach it differently. And also pain teaches you about how reality works. Reality is reality. We're given reality. A lot of people say they want to fight what reality is. It's woe is me, and stop thinking about it being differently. Just understand, like, why did that thing happen to me? And how do I put it in perspective? It's like nature doesn't care about you, right? It cares about the universe. And so when you have those experiences, just understand how reality works and also how to approach it better. That's smart, I think. So I think pain is the best teacher.
What do you think has been the greatest pain in your lifetime that you had to learn a lesson from?
Well, of course, the greatest pains are losing people that I love the most, which then gets me to reflect on the arc of life, right? And what it's all like. But things in terms of I've come differently. I remember a case that changed me profoundly. To tell you the story quickly. So I started my business in 1975, investing. And it's easy to be wrong in investing. Mm-hmm. That's part of the game. But in 1980, 81, I calculated that American banks had lent a lot more money to countries than those countries were going to be able to pay back, and that they would therefore have a big debt default, and that would cause an economic crisis. And it got a lot of attention because it was a controversial view. And then in Mexico defaulted in August 1982. So that prediction sort of, came right, and some countries did. And I got a lot more attention because of that was right. And I thought we were going to go into an economic spiral, a depression, a big debt crisis. And I couldn't have been more wrong. And I was that was the exact bottom in the stock market.
Yeah.
And I lost money. I lost money for myself. I lost money for my clients. I had to let everybody in my company go. And I was so broke, I had to borrow $4,000 from my dad.
Wow.
To help pay some of my family bills. So, I mean, it was a lot of pain.
This was 82?
Yeah.
So you were broke then, 82.
Broke. Totally
no
broke.
money.
No money. No
wow.
Money. And that was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It was very painful, but it was one of the best things because it gave me the fear of being wrong without me losing my audacity. In other words, it gave me an open-mindedness. It made me start to think, how do I deal with what I don't know? So it made me find the smartest people I could find who disagreed with me to start to understand their thinking. It made me think about how I could maintain that upside. Risk goes with return. So I didn't want to have an ordinary life. Mm-hmm. So I still wanted the big upside return, but how could I do that without less risk? That's right. And so that was a problem. That was part of my reflection. And that reflection led me to understand how I could diversify better, how I could stress test my thinking better, and so on. Then I brought in the smartest people I could find who were independent thinkers who would disagree with me. And then I did that. And that was the exact bottom financially and so on in my life. From that point up to, not long ago, Fortune described Bridgewater as the 5th most important private company in the country, in the US. And so it was that pain and reflecting well on that pain that gave me a greater ability to deal with what I don't know. And I learned, this is an important thing to learn, that whatever success I had came more from my knowing how to deal with my not knowing than from anything I knew. In other words, what you know in your head is only a small percentage of what the important things and the right things to know is. And so to be able to go outside of one's head and to take in the best of the best, wherever it comes, and then use that to make decisions. And all of that came from that painful, very painful mistake.
Where do you think you'd be today if in 82 you didn't go broke and have that massive pain?
I'm sure I'd have, a very ordinary, I don't know, life. I don't know, because I wouldn't have known how to have great upside while having acceptable risks. Right. In other words, like I at the time I reflected it. I felt it was like the following. I'm on one side of a jungle, and I'm on this one side of a jungle, and you could go in order to imagine you could have great success if you can cross the jungle alive to get to the other side. But in the jungle are all sorts of terrible things that could kill you and so on. And you have a choice. You can have this boring, or you can have this ordinary life, or you can try to cross the jungle. Now, each one of us would approach that differently. For me, I had to have the greatest life I could have. So I have a little bit of a taste of adventure. So how would you cross that jungle? And what I learned was that the best way to cross that jungle would be with a team of people who I cared about, they cared about with me, who could see things that I couldn't see, and I could see things that they couldn't see. And that way you could be effective together. And so that's what I did. That's how it worked. And what I also learned through that thing is, like, I don't want to get out of the jungle. I don't want to get to the other side, because the actual act of being in it with them and to do those things is itself rewarding. So I'm confident that I wouldn't have learned that if I didn't have that kind of experience.
So you're still in the jungle today?
Yeah, I'm in my jungle. But my jungle, everyone's jungle is a life arc. There's a life arc, right? You have to recognize the life arc. 0 to, 80, 85 or something is the life arc. Something like that. I'm 71. I know where I am on that journey. Okay. It's important to know, where are you on your journey? And then when you start to think about that, like, where will I be in 10 years? I'm going to be a different person in 10 years. Okay. Where will the people I love be? Think about yourself. Where will you be in 10 years? And where will the people you love be? It could be your kids. It could be your parents. Where will they be? And what will their experiences and the journey that they're going through and you're going through? And this script in the journey, by the way, is pretty well known, right? Like, I think, I'll give you an example. I think it comes kind of in 3 phases. The first phase is when you're dependent on others and, you're learning. Okay. Then what happens is you get out of school and you become independent and you go to work, and then it's entirely different. You're in the second phase of your life when others are dependent on you and you're working and you're trying to be successful. And then but there are the arcs, and you could see markers along those lines. Do you get married? When do you have a kid? When, like, I realized, like, when my kids have kids, I'm now in my third phase. Okay. So you see these things, and so you have to see that. So what I want at this phase of my life at 71, I'm in transition from my second phase, in which I've worked and I've won and I've played, it's like, had my battles and it was great and so on. And now I'm in a mission to pass along the things that were valuable to me. I want to pass them along to others. And then I'm going to go quiet. And then I'm in that other phase, but you learn things. And so this is kind of a mentor, pass it along phase.
How do you stay confident in transition from kind of one identity to a new identity? That's something new, that's something unknown, whether it be in your personal transition life or in the financial world, where things are unknown, things are transitioning, or it might seem like it. How do you personally stay confident in the transition?
first of all, you're really talking about comfort with ambiguity.
Yeah.
Okay. And the way that I feel it is, life is like an adventure.
Mm.
I mean, if you knew everything, it wouldn't be nearly as good, right? So the ambiguity is part of it. It's part of the game. It's just the way it is. And then, so to then experience that and to know how to deal with ambiguity, because the same rules apply. You know, feel it. What's it like? How does it feel? Where are the pulls to? How do you learn? How do you learn how to approach it? What's it like? Speak to others who have been in that spot before. You know, taste it, and so on. Our preferences change, you know, as you're going through all those things. So you feel it out, you learn about it, you go to the things that you feel the pull toward.
I'm curious. You have feelings you've been talking about for a few moments, but I know you're a very thoughtful human being. You create algorithms for your entire work, your team, everything is based on algorithms, kind of thoughts and ideas. But I'm hearing you say you're a deep feeler as well. Would you say you're more led by thoughts or your feelings?
And no, I think it's the alignment of them. Okay, here's the facts pertaining them. There is a subliminal mind that we have, and there's a conscious mind. Freud discovered that there's a subliminal mind. So we have, and in that subliminal mind, we just don't see it because it's not conscious, but it has a big effect. And so feelings and those things are coming through that subliminal mind, and it really has a big control. And then there's a conscious logical mind. So they, for everybody. And so they're in your mind, they're like everybody's mind. There are these kind of two minds that are working. Now, I find that when I align them, meditation has had a big effect on me. I've been meditating since 1969.
Wow.
So for a long time, because what that does, literally, it's an exercise where you repeat a mantra, the sound, and then you lose sort of a consciousness and you go into the subconscious mind. But in any case, to reconcile feelings with thoughts, to recognize feelings with logic and align them, like each has to double check for me. Like if my feelings, I'm a big feeling person. The most important things in life for me are what? Inspiration, love. You know, what is it about? I mean, what are you doing it for? But at the same time, to be able to get there, logic and be able to express oneself and you know, in algorithms or so is a good thing. So when they're aligned, it's kind of a double check and it works at both levels. So I think that's most important.
When you doubt a decision or maybe just a moment in your life, personal or business related, doesn't matter. When you're in doubt of something, what is your personal mantra to get you back to a kind of a centered, aligned place where you can make a better decisions?
Well, on the doubts, you know, the question is always like, how big of a deal is it? And what is this type of bet and so on? And, you know, little doubts. No, okay, that's no big thing. You know, life and death decisions, those kinds of things. They're big, you know, those are the big questions. And what I realize on those is doubting is part of that process. You can only be sure a certain amount. How do you get to the best triangulation? In other words, take in from the smartest people and your own thoughts and so on, so that you're making that, understand how reality works, and then try to make sure that none of your decisions are the ones that knock you out of the game. In other words, like I've got an expression for people who work for me: you can scratch the car, but you can't total the car. You know, you could. So realize, okay, you don't win it all. You make your best bets, but don't have the one. So you have to eliminate the killer ones, because you have enough killer ones, and odds are one of them is going to get you.
Right.
So you know, I approach it basically that way. Try to make the diversification, try not to have any killer, eliminate all of those that are unacceptable, and then go for the upside and doubt. But, I'm used to doubt. I doubt, there's everything. Every time you put on a position in the markets, for example, I am never sure look, it would be easy if I knew. Right. So there's a lot of doubt.
Right.
So doubt is part of it, but don't put yourself in a position that you can have unacceptable.
Where you go broke.
Being banged around a little bit is okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So how do you have confidence when you're doubting yourself and you're like, I think this is going to do well based on all the math and historical evidence and feelings? How do you have confidence when you place that bet?
I have enough bets that I make the bet so that no one of them, I won't allow anyone that'll kill me.
Right.
And then I raise, and I'll typically only want to make bets that I feel good about. And I will have them stress tested, my bets, by having other people stress test it. So yeah, just imagine, I don't know, you're playing a chess game.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, maybe you're a chess master, but okay, what are you going to do? You have to still make a move. So, okay, what's the best thing to do? Now, imagine you could ask the best chess masters in the world what you do and think about the pros and cons and make your decision and just not make it that also one's going to knock out of the game. So it's that. I think that take our three things. I think that there's better than an even chance of a bad stagflation, a very bad stagflation, because of the dynamics. I think I'll say 1 in 3 chance, but I think it's actually probably higher than that we have a type of civil war, internal conflict.
Really?
In which, the rules are not followed. The compromises are not made. That may be those who they don't accept losing an election. That there's movement of people to different states that they believe represent them better. And there's a polarity developing in the going to different states. And that there's not obeying the central government. So now it becomes a game. I don't think that to be I'm in the business, I need to be objective.
Right.
Because accuracy is my thing. I have to be as accurate as possible. I'm not saying that's accurate, but I'm saying when I look at that, I don't think my assuming that's a 1 in 3. I think it's actually probably higher than that there will be that kind of a situation. And I think it's better than higher than a 1 in 3. I think maybe significantly higher, that you get into the same conflict in the power. For example, internationally. For example, does Russia or the West win the war in the Ukraine? I'll define Putin winning the war as 3 things. He gains control of the eastern part of the Ukraine. Russia's economy is not devastated by sanctions, and he remains in power.
Wow.
And let's say, for example, he can attend and Russia attends the next G20 meeting. Okay. So
that's him winning the war.
That's him winning the war, because in the beginning of that, it was worth his cost. I mean, he wants more than that. He wants a neutral Ukraine or an aligned Ukraine, but he's not going to probably go get that. But that's the minimum. Now that's him winning the war. That's also kind of the West losing the war. Now, but if he loses the war, if he loses that, he will probably escalate. Okay, because the war is now being played as a on the ground armies to armies, and with sanctions. But he has other weapons. And rather than go down, he will probably escalate. Okay. That's a game of chicken.
Right.
It's a very dangerous game.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are other issues globally. For example, you're seeing these alliances work out, and you're seeing the United States, for various reasons, sort of pull out of the Middle East, and you're seeing China more move in. And so these tensions exist, and power exists. There are more countries that have nuclear weapons now than there were. And, there's even talk of joint military operations between China and Iran. And so you see these sides begin to align. So if I say that there's a 1 in 3 chance of some kind of a military confrontation, that scares the hell out of us, or that is extremely, I don't think that sounds too high. I think it's larger than that. So that means I think we're headed for some risky times, because any one of those things is really is not normal. Any one of those things is not what we're used to. It's pretty bad.
And
but
again,
if everybody worries, they don't have to worry. If both sides think about what that's like and say, I can't, we must come together and make sure that does not happen.
Yeah, that would take us being rational human beings, right? And having some inner wisdom and a consciousness.
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm trying to pass along. I passed along the book, which was a study for my own benefit, but I also did an animation, and to try to pass it along, so to help people understand this. The animation, I put it out a month ago. It's got 11 million views. It's very digestible.
Yeah.
So on YouTube,
we'll have that. We'll have that linked up in our description on audio and on YouTube for people to watch. It's really powerful. I'm curious. You've seen a lot in the last 4 or 5 decades of being in this industry and this business and in the financial world. With everything that's happened over the last couple of years, not just pandemic, but stock markets going up and down, wars, inner conflict of countries, all these different things, cryptocurrencies coming in, the decentralization of money, all these different things. What do you even think is going to happen in the next 10 years with the whole 2030 agenda being talked about? What do you see happening over the next 10 years?
I should say that one thing when I did that, I discovered the 3 forces that I mentioned. I discovered a 4th and a 5th that are very important and big. One is that, interestingly, acts of nature in the form of droughts, floods, and pandemics have had a bigger impact than the things I've been talking about, in terms of cost more lives or toppled more civilizations, those acts of nature. So I think that's something probably that we have to be concerned about. But number 5, over long periods of time, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, the most powerful force is man's ability to adapt and invent. Tremendous capability of adapting and inventing. So you'll see charts in the book, and you'll see here's a Great Depression and here's a war. And as you see those things, they look like blips on the chart of life expectancy, per capita income, and so on. And so there's a tremendous capacity for dealing with all the other stuff if man can adapt to it well, and inventiveness during this period of time should be kind of, I think, really great, because what we're using more and more is types of technology, artificial intelligence and so on, the ability to think and collect data and use the computer to help us with that is a very, very powerful force. Now, like any forces, it's also a risky force because it can be used for bad as well as for good. But I think the world will evolve. We will have these cycles in the world. So that's what you see. You see these cycles, and then you see evolution through those cycles and adaptation. And so I expect that. But I would say there's the probabilities I gave you before, that concern me. So, a lot will be unknown, but we have a lot of potential and a lot of things to worry about.
You've created so much wealth for yourself. You've been building so much, and you're still very busy. It's not like you're done by any means. You're still growing. But if you were your late 30s, early 40s at this time, and you had been building a business and building a team and trying to set yourself up to be healthy in all the different areas of your life, how would you be thinking if you're in your 30s, early 40s about the next few moves that you should make as an individual?
Oh, it's very interesting because there's a life cycle. I won't, but the upshot of the life cycle is in your early years, you're quite often your happiest years, and the happiest years extend just until you a bit past you getting out of school. So there's three phases. The first phase is you're dependent on others. You're trying to learn and be successful. And then you come out of school and you're idealistic. You can do everything. You don't have much obligations. You take on the job and so on. That's a happy period. Then you have a work-life balance challenge. And life is harder than you expect it to be, typically. And that notion that I'm going to be just easily, terrifically successful is difficult. And so if you take the least happy period of life by measures of happiness across most societies, it comes in really something like the 45 to 50 period. That's because you have the work-life balance. Maybe the relationship that you had with your spouse is not, or whatever your significant other isn't as wonderful as you'd imagined it would be. That's when the divorce rates are higher. You're overstretched. You're having to take care of your kids, and you're having to take care of your parents. It's a tough phase. That's a tough phase. And then what happens is, as you pass that, it's very interesting. From 55 until the person approaches whatever that is that's going to kill them is the happiest period of time. Even happier than the earlier period of time by records, because you become free. You're not so hung up on, am I the best accomplishments? I'm okay. You're self-sufficient. You have the choices, whatever, and you don't have to take care of your parents. You don't have to take care of your kids. The kids are grown up, and your parents have passed away, and so on. So that's the pattern. And so when you think about this in terms of, let's say, your question, okay, what's the advice? My first bit of advice is meditate. I found that meditation, I do transcendental meditation. I find that that gives me a calmness and an equanimity to deal with my realities that are coming at me. Okay. Life is just a matter of choices. And I found, generally speaking, when things are at odds and there's this conflict, if you step back with a clear head, you can get most of each that you think is at odds. For example, on this work-life balance, most people think well, do I take more free time and take it away from work? Or do I take work and take it away from the free time, and so on? But the real answer to the question is, how am I going to be efficient so I get more out of a day or more out of an hour? And if with equanimity, you look at your circumstances and you say, okay, how can I get more? Then you can put more life into life. Yes. Because you reduce that. But you have to have that equanimity, not a sense that stress and these things are happening to me and I'm angry and I'm upset, okay? Because that will hurt you physically. Stress is a killer. And it also won't make your best decisions. So I'm trying to give an equanimity, and again, pain plus reflection equals progress. Reflection, quality reflection, not just yourself, but even asking people and looking for principles of other people who are in that same situation. It's not like this is the first time you've gone through this or anybody's gone through it. Right. So when you ask others, well, how do you deal with work-life balance or the other things, you'll find interesting things and you'll be able to deal with it.
Okay. So meditation would be one thing.
And that equanimity, and look at it and realize it's just your choices. It's not the world picking on you, but it's the world. It's life.
The world's happening.
It's reality.
Yeah.
And, that kind of it's an approach to life.
Yeah. Were you always a meditator?
I started in 1969. So I've been pretty much, I forgot what I was at the time, whatever that is,
Wait, 2 years old then?
Yeah. No, like 18 or something, 20 or whatever, 22. I don't know.
Yeah.
I kept that.
And so that's probably what helped you get through the loss, the financial loss in 1984, and kind of the public, I guess, embarrassment or humiliation that you might have faced since it was public, and processing through your emotions.
Helped me get through everything. I lost a son, my greatest loss, not quite 2 years ago, 42-year-old son. Oh my God, I would rather die. I would rather lose everything. And but it's, it was that. And it's like the serenity prayer, serenity prayer. God, give me the acceptance, the ability to accept that which I can't control, and the power to control that which I can, and the wisdom to tell the difference. And so there, yes, because life happens to you, okay? And you can't just sit there and be sorry for yourself. I mean, I don't mean when hurt happens that you can't nurture yourself and take care of yourself, but then comes a period of reflecting, and you have to deal with it. So meditation and that equanimity is just so important.
I just lost my father 3 months ago, and unexpectedly, and it was it's been a grieving process, and lots of beautiful, grateful moments, but also a lot of sadness, and almost every few days, a lot of sadness that comes over me over different moments.
I know it well, and here's the way I see it. Don't feel sorry for yourself feeling sad. Go into it. Yeah. In other words, when I think of my son, and you think about your father, and there's the missing, go into that. That's okay, because he in his way is with you in a sense. Yeah. You're keeping that memory, so it's bittersweet.
Yes.
And what happens is that with time, the sweetness increases relative to the bitterness. And also learn the lesson to love and cherish all the other people in your life. Go hug them, go spend the time with them, go appreciate, smell the flowers that remain, because there are other joys around you, and that and then realize that your sadness is because something that must have been terrific was taken away from you. So you've had all that terrificness, and I mean, it's better that way than not having it that way. So anyway, those are the things that helped me. I can go at length of other things that I did that helped me. I'll might as well say that because maybe they help your readers too.
What's been the biggest? Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the. Again, I don't have any kids, so I don't know what that would feel like. But I've heard that that's got to be one of the greatest losses for a parent to lose a child. What's been the biggest lesson for you and throughout the last couple of years?
Well, and I want to generalize it to you losing your father. I remember when I lost my mother for the first time, and in the early time, I couldn't imagine laughing again. And now, I mean, like, okay, I laugh, and I almost have mental conversations with her because I know what she would answer, and so on. So I think it applies to all important losses. And some of the things that helped me, well, besides meditation, was to do it very naturally. Feel what I felt, whatever I felt, I would go with it. Another thing I did was I would journal. My wife and I have a cup of tea each morning, and we have a picture of him there, and we have some flowers, and then we journal memories of him.
That's beautiful.
And and that brings those memories out. I journal and I pass it to her, and she journals, and that keeps those memories alive. And then we'll give that to his daughter. And then there was a little book. I forgot the name of the book that somebody sent us on grieving or mourning. And it had a series of things. We would read a page in that every day. And it was like a lot of good advice. Death happens to everybody. I mean, everybody is going to, people they love, everybody's going to die. And to pay attention to it and know how to do it well. We don't talk much about it, and we should really. So anyway, those are some of the things that helped me.
Thanks
and
for
my
sharing.
wife.
I appreciate that. That's beautiful. And to go along with that, I guess, how do you view death for yourself as you continue to evolve and grow and obviously getting older? Do you think about your own mortality? Do you think about your own death? Do you think about,
of course,
what you want to do with your time? Do you think about what you want to do with your lessons or your wealth, or what are those thoughts that you have about it?
Of course, it's first of all, I accept the arc of life. The arc of life and death. So it's very real. And then I'm blessed with I could do almost anything I want to do. And I'm at a stage in my life where something seems natural to me, which is a transition from my second stage of my life to my third. So I said the first is when you're learning and depending on others. Second stage of life is others are depending on you. You're working to be successful. Third stage of life is when you're free of all obligations. So you're free to live and free to die. You're going to have that. And you have your blessings, my grandchildren and anything, and I can do whatever I want to do. And I find that instinctually during that transition period from my second phase to my third phase is to pass along things that I had to help others be successful without me. So yes, that happens to do with wealth. It happens to do, most importantly, I think, with principles that have helped me. That's why am I doing this right. Call? Okay, because I think it'll be helpful, and that period of time will last a very short period of time. I think that probably there's one more book I want to put out, which is my economic and investment principles. I'll pass that along. I think I'll be done. And then I'll go quiet and I'll just, savor life and those things. But I find life very exciting and stimulating, but I'm approaching it with a no obligation. Like I've passed along the control of the business that I built, And I love it because I want to help them be successful without me. So that's where I am.
That's beautiful. Couple final questions for you. I feel like I could speak with you for many hours, Ray. So I appreciate your time, but I want to be respectful as well. One question about your thoughts on decentralizing, money with the dollar and the euro and all these things losing its value, and with what seems like hysteria of crypto, NFT, the metaverse, money in the metaverse type of conversation. I kind of include all that. What do you see happening there in the future with crypto? I think I read somewhere that you own some of crypto. I'm not sure how much, but you've done some of it.
Just a little bit.
What's your thoughts about the crypto space, Bitcoin, Ethereum, kind of all of that in the future?
I think we're in an era of that money as we know it, which is a fiat money, is being devalued, and it's going to change. The dollar's role is going to change, and that alternatives are going to compete with that. So, like, I wouldn't want to own money when you own a dollar, let's say, is in the form of a debt instrument. So you're going to get paid back in that, and I think it'll have a negative real rate and a negative buying power, and so on in almost any currency, and they're all competing. So they're all devaluing essentially. And so money is both a medium of exchange and a storehold of wealth that is portable and works in most countries. And now we'll find out what those things are. I mean, gold is an example of one of those, and crypto is an example of those. And maybe NFTs are, and who knows. I think we're in a kind of a who knows kind of phase. New things come along, and then there'll be that, and I think they'll compete. And I think that people will start to think about, how do I have a portfolio of those things that I can take from, that are widely accepted, that I can and that maintain buying power. Now, there's challenges to that. Like when you have a lot of volatility in it, it means that, oh my God, my owning it is more volatile,
right?
Is more risky than my not owning it. And so that drives money into sort of other things. But anyway, we're going to struggle with that, and you're going to see digital currencies in different countries and so on. And I honestly don't know. I don't think one thing wins out. I do think that a lot of the crypto, they go, like all markets, they go through phases, and there's kind of the bubble phase where, it goes up a lot and everybody believes it, and the story believes it, and everybody's bought in it. And then you have the adjustments and so on. I think there's too much emphasis in it, because the total value, of Bitcoin or even the cryptocurrency is not much, is comparable to the value of Microsoft. So one has to think, when one thinks of assets, I would rather think about the whole array of assets than to think about, just, is it going to be that crypto Bitcoin one?
Yes.
I think people could be too concentrated on that. And I think that could be dangerous.
Right.
So I don't know the answer. I do know there are lots of storeholds in wealth that you can.
Diversification is your key. Yeah.
Diversification is my key. Yeah.
There's a great quote that I like, and I'm going to butcher it, but it goes something like this. I think it's from Jim Carrey, where he says, I wish everyone had the ability to become rich and famous, and realize that that's not the answer. Something around that. I'm paraphrasing it.
That's so true.
If you could give people what it feels like to be, one of the richest people in the world, and what a lot of money means. What does it actually mean? If you could kind of share that for people.
I can describe what it means for me, and might be different things for other people. Let me start off by, I acquired it by an accident, because the game that I happened to fall in love with Mm-hmm. If you learn to play the game well, it pays well.
Right.
Okay. And a lot of people, I think that's true with a lot of people who are coming up with ideas and building businesses and so on. They got excited about it. It works well. And then it pays well. To me, it's a serious mistake that thinking that success is measured in such things, because money has no intrinsic value. Mm-hmm. Okay. What does money get you? And what do you need? Now, what I want is freedom and the ability to be creative and do that. That's what I want. But money helps me get that. It helps me help other people. It helps me have the impact. I like those things about it. But more importantly, I like my game. I like to play with my game. Mm-hmm. Not more important, but anyway, comparably important. I think that success is having the life that you want to have, as long as you're earning more money than you spend. Mm-hmm. And that can be spending very little and having a wonderfully luxurious life. Like, I watch a lot of people don't have much money, and of different ages, sometimes young, sometimes older. They travel around the world, they backpack, mm-hmm. They go to different cultures and different places. They can live in a tent or in the most beautiful, the most beautiful nature is available to you. Uh-huh. You can be in a hostel, or you can meet in so many different ways.
Couch surfing, yeah,
and have freedom. And so on. I think everybody should almost experience that, to know that they can have a great deal of freedom without a great deal of money, and that also that status thing is a silly thing. Okay, mm-hmm. That's like being hung up on living your life for approvals, and so so don't get on the track and lose sight that, okay, what is it that you really want in your life? What is a successful life for you? It's not measured by how much money you have or how much status you have or almost that other stuff. It's measured in, like I would say, again, meaningful work and meaningful relationships. If you have something as your work that you're into and your craft, and it's a thing you love, and you have meaningful relationships, I think those are the most important things to make a rich life.
And the more I learned, the more I realized I was lied to. Like, we're taught to go to school, to get a degree, to get a job, so we can then get a job and climb the corporate ladder. But wealthy people don't do that. Wealthy people are not working to climb the corporate ladder, they're working to own the corporate ladder. I didn't even realize that you could do that.